Hi, everyone. Welcome to Restitch America. I'm your host, Alma Ohene-Opare, and this is the podcast where we mend the fabric of our nation one thread and one story at a time. Thank you so much for joining us today. And today's episode is one that I've been planning for a while. However, we had some scheduling difficulties. But today, I bring to you a guest that I think you will all love. But before we get into any of that, let's remember, if you're not following us, please go ahead and like, follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with anybody. And then also, please take a moment to go to willfulpositivity.com. Willfulpositivity.com is our community. And the reason why I keep harping on this is because every day I write a devotional, and then I also write articles. And the articles that I write are the foundation of the conversations that we have. So if you are part of the community, you will have a heads up on what we're going to discuss. And today's article is titled Family, the Original Social Safety Net. And my guest today, his name is Jackson Lahmeyer. And I'm going to have Jackson introduce himself a little bit, tell us about his background, and get us started on that discussion. So welcome to the show, Jackson.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor. And a little background on me. I am the husband of a woman who is absolutely amazing named Kendra. We have 5 children. We live in Oklahoma, pastor a great church, Sheridan Church, Tulsa, Oklahoma, as well as Oklahoma City. And I serve on the White House Faith Office alongside with the National Faith Advisory Board. And so just having a lot of fun in life and looking forward to talking today about what you just brought up.
All right. So thank you so much for sharing with us your background. And I've been to a lot of different states in America. I think I've been to probably 20 or 25 states, but I've never been to Oklahoma. So
You got to
you
come to
have to give me a
Oklahoma.
reason to come to Oklahoma. Now I
Well,
can
it's
say I know
Tulsa,
someone
Jerusalem.
there.
Listen, I know Jesus is returning to Jerusalem, but if there is a problem in returning to Jerusalem, I'm very confident he will be coming to Tulsa, Jerusalem. It'll be the second destination if there's a problem with the flight traffic over in Jerusalem that day.
Yeah, a funny thing, my son, so I have a son who's in college right now, but he did get admitted to the Sooners, the University of Oklahoma. The only problem is, I mean, just so far away.
Yeah.
And so we decided to keep him in state. So he's in state now, but that's our little connection to Oklahoma. My son could have been a Sooner.
I love it.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's get into the discussion for today. So, as I said, the article for this discussion is titled Family, the Original Social Safety Net. So, I want to start by reading the first paragraph of the article, and that's going to be the basis of our discussion. So, before governments, before kings, before charities and bureaucracies, there was family, humanity's oldest and most enduring social unit. From the dawn of time, men and women joined together, raised children, and built tribes anchored in shared love, duty, and belonging. In every corner of the world, the family has been the first and most reliable line of defense against the storms of life, economic hardship, emotional pain, sickness, and loss. Family is not merely a social construct, it is a divine design. It is the first school, the first church, the first hospital, and the first bank. It is the original social safety net, woven together by love and sacrifice. And when families are strong, societies flourish. But when families crumble, no government program can fill the void. So let's talk about that a little bit. I have been in America for about 22 years. And in the 22 years I've lived here, I have seen various levels of, I would say, kind of the attack on the family. And from your perspective as a pastor, am I, reading this correctly, or is there an attack on the family, and what have you seen from your perch?
Oh, I think you're totally spot on. Part of the radical left agenda, which is a godless agenda, is also an anti family agenda. Part of that is weak families or no families at all, and not having children, not getting married, all the different stats that you can see that are happening within the United States of America. And I think, something good to realize is that, to your point, what you said, family is much more than just a social contract. Actually, family is originated and designed by God Himself. It's a form of government. Actually, God created four types of government. He created self government, where we are to govern ourselves in accordance with our relationship to Him. God created civil government. That is what we see in regards to elected officials that are there to protect good citizens, to punish wrongdoers, according to the Bible. God created church government, how the church is to operate and flourish. But then God also created what is called family government. And a lot of time is addressed to how the family is to govern itself, how the family is to operate within the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament, because it is such an important and vital role in the lives of everybody, because we all have a family per se. And so the strength of the family will in large part determine the strength of the church, also the strength of a nation. And what we have seen is a total attack on local families within communities. That is either to get the father out of the household so that there is a void for fatherhood, which then the government can come fill in, or that is to simply don't have a family at all, don't get married, don't have children. That's kind of been the message that has been put out there for people that are in my age bracket and younger. And so I think you have to just see family is a beautiful thing. Family is a necessary thing. You cannot have a society if you do not have families as the bedrock of that society. You cannot have a church if you do not have families that are the bedrock of that. And so we have to value family. You have to invest in family. You have to manage a family. A family is a business. A lot of people may not like that terminology, but it is a business, and you have to operate that business. You have money that comes in, you have money that goes out. You have employees within the family. Those are called your kids, all right? Your kids are your employees within the family unit, all right? And then you have your managers. That's the husband and the wife. And God's given us a blueprint of how to have successful, harmonious families. And unfortunately, our culture has really been intentional about breaking up the family unit. And so, yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. I think it's a very, very vital and important topic.
Certainly. The way I like to approach things is to look in some cases very generously towards even those people who disagree with my position, right? I want to understand where people are coming from. Is there like a real reason behind the attempt to break up the family? Like, what do you think would be a purpose that someone would have to want to break up the family?
Well, it would kind of depend on who that person is and where they're coming from. A lot of it is selfish in nature because a family requires you to sacrifice. If you're a husband, you have to sacrifice for your family. If you're a wife, you have to sacrifice for your family. And so we live in a very individualistic society. I pull myself up from my own bootstraps. I'm the one who can go out and conquer the world for myself. And that selfish mentality is a part of the American fabric, for better or for worse. And so, this idea is I can get a lot further in life if I don't have to bring a wife and kids with me, or if I don't have to bring a husband and kids with me. And so, part of this anti family movement, it's built on selfishness, that I want to get ahead for myself, whether that is career. I don't want to have to, be a father. I don't want to have to be a mother. I don't want that responsibility, I guess is what you could say.
What
So I think a
about
real big part of it is selfishness.
Yeah, but what about those people who make the claim that look at the state of the world? We have all sorts of challenges and all sorts of problems, we have conflict, we have and some people will even call things like climate change and other things as real obstacles, and they feel that they're doing something compassionate, right? They're doing something compassionate by saying, I don't want to bring children into the world to suffer in this way. What about that argument? And the same argument is also used in many cases for the abortion agenda. It's this idea that a child being born to parents who may not be in the financial position to care for them will be better off not alive.
Yeah,
And that is seen in some corners as compassion, right?
sure.
So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy. All of us who are alive are very grateful that our parents didn't have compassion and not give us life. So that's first of all. I'm very grateful my parents were not compassionate, that they gave life to me and that I am here. That's the first thing. In regards to bringing a child into this world that is rough and tumble world, and that maybe you have two parents that are not prepared, right? That are not ready financially, emotionally, to have children. Well, I can speak to that actually personally, not from a theoretical level, but from a practical level. I found out that I was going to be a father when I was 17 years old in high school. I was a junior in high school, and I got my girlfriend pregnant. She was a year younger than me. She was 16, and all the advice was, you need to force her to have an abortion. All the advice was, it's going to be kids raising kids, and you're going to jeopardize this child and the future and all those kind of things. And that was the advice, abortion, abortion, abortion. And thank God he intervened, and we did not have an abortion. And today I have a 16-year-old daughter that is absolutely incredible. Her life has not been perfect, but her life has been good. And she has a very bright, bright future. And I promise you, if you were to ask her, not me, she's very grateful that we did not have compassion upon her and in her life inside of her mother's womb 16 years ago. And so this is something I can speak to not in theory, but in practicality. Was I prepared to be a father? Absolutely not. But I don't know if you're ever prepared to be a father. It is when you become a father that you learn, you grow, you make mistakes, and you get prepared along the journey. And so, yeah, I was 17 years old. I was a child raising a child, yet God, in His infinite mercy and grace, intervened. And like I said, today I got a 16-year-old daughter that is driving, that is flourishing. And like I said, if you were to ask her, I'm very confident she would say, I am grateful they did not have compassion upon me before I took my first breath.
Thank you for sharing that experience. So I'm going to continue reading a little bit here. We live in an age where the family's role as the cornerstone of stability is being quietly eroded. We're told that the state can and should take care of us, that the government can raise our children, provide for our elderly, and sustain the poor. Yet, as noble as these efforts may appear, they often replace what cannot be replaced: the moral, emotional, and spiritual nourishment that only family can give. So let's talk about the state wanting to take on that role of being the social safety net. Back in the day, if someone needed something, you lived in communities where people went to church together. They knew their neighbors. They understood what was going on in the community. And the way that I've always looked at it is, the larger the government, the more insignificant the individual becomes, right? And so as the government grows, the one of the I would say unintended consequences of larger government is the fact that we begin to abdicate our responsibility to our neighbors. Because now, instead of seeing your neighbor struggling, your mind goes to, but I pay taxes. I pay taxes. So the government is the one that should be caring for my neighbor. And by so doing, we've replaced the natural instincts of communities to help and support each other with a demand for government to do something. So I grew up in a country where one of the, I would say, most infamous things that we say is the government should do this or the government should do that. And you see people who would come together and talk at length at what the government should do. And the government should do this, and the government is not doing this. And if only the government will do this. And I'm like, what can you do for yourself? What can you do? And once we create this sense that we are no longer responsible and we can abdicate our roles to love our neighbors to some faceless entity that is responsible, what you end up with is clearly apparent in places like San Francisco, in places like Oakland, where you see basically the dregs of humanity. You see people suffering with their addictions, people struggling, living in tents, people, being left to wallow in destructive behavior because everything has been left to the government. So why is the state not a suitable replacement for family?
Well, the state is impersonal. It is impersonal, whereas your family is very personal. Your family knows you. Your family actually cares about you. You're a name to your family. You're a number to the state. And that's just the reality of things. And so anytime the state replaces family, here's what you have to realize. History is very clear on this. The state that feeds you is also the state that will enslave you. That is human history. If the state feeds you, the state will enslave you. That's just a part of it. And so you have to make that decision. If you want to be fed by the state, well, be prepared to be enslaved by the same exact state as well. And so, listen, we're grateful for programs that are out there that exist to help people. We're grateful for, organizations that are nonprofit organizations that help people and all those kind of things. But there's a string attached if it's the state that is feeding you. There's a string attached to it. Whereas when it comes to your family or your community, families and communities typically, not always because we're fallen people with fallen natures, but typically families and communities will feed you without strings attached to it because simply you're family. Or you're a part of the community. And we take care of our own. That's kind of the motto. We take care of our own. And unfortunately, we've abandoned that because it is a lot easier to say, oh, well, the government will do that. I pay taxes, the government, so we're abjecting our responsibility to an entity that will take care of everything for us. And that way we can focus on ourselves, focus on our goals, and this really comes down to back again to selfishness. And by nature, we're all selfish. It's part of the human heart condition that we all suffer with. And so we have a legitimate excuse. I pay taxes, and therefore the government should help those who are in need because that is by proxy me helping those that are in need. And unfortunately, it has never worked in human history. And I have a strange suspicion it's not going to work today or tomorrow because human history is rife with examples of the government that feeds you is the exact same government that will enslave you. And so we want strong families and communities because we want to be free and we don't want to be bondage to our government because government has a tendency to grow and overuse or abuse its authority and power. That's why someone like me, I'm a very limited government type of guy. I don't think government is the answer to our problems. I think government mostly is the problem, quoting Ronald Reagan, who I think was very correct in that. And so this is where strong families come into play, though, because if you don't have strong families, something or someone will fill that void. And within American culture, that thing has been the American government. If you just look at how many people are dependent upon the American government. I mean, just a couple months ago, right, we experienced when the government shutdown took place, it was total like how many millions and millions of Americans were getting ready not to be able to eat, getting ready not to be able to provide for their families. And that's a problem. You don't want to be dependent upon an entity that really does not care about you. And we have to break away from that. You don't do that overnight. It's a change in mindset that has to take place. It'll have to be a generational change. But I think conversations like this are very important to have.
Exactly. One part of the conversation that I think gets missed is when the community, when the family is the social safety net, what it does is it teaches the next generation virtue. It teaches them principles of compassion, tolerance, love. Those are principles that the government can never impart on people, right? Those are
Yeah.
principles that you will never learn in a welfare office. Okay, for both the person who is receiving the help and the person who is giving the help, by making replacing the family and replacing the community with a faceless government, what you end up with, what you end up with, is people who one do not understand where the help is coming from, right? They don't understand that this is the combined help of their neighbors through taxes. They don't understand that. And they become entitled to receive those benefits. And we rob the next generation of the language of virtue. We rob them of the experiences of actually being a community. Because once we can outsource all these activities that are supposed to build our character, once we can outsource that to a third party, then where do we learn compassion? Where do we learn,
Right.
tolerance? Where do we learn, loving our neighbor? Where do we learn all those things, right? And that is something that I think is not spoken of a lot. So one part of the article I said here, the state, unlike a father or mother, cannot love. It cannot instill virtue or discipline. It cannot offer the kind of accountability that comes from shared blood and shared destiny. Bureaucracies can distribute funds, but they cannot heal hearts. They can provide shelter, but they cannot build homes. What do you think about that?
I think it's totally true. And to your point, government is a cold hearted, faceless, impersonable entity. And so part of the great thing about being human is we have the ability to express empathy. We have the ability to be generous. We have the ability to sacrifice for others. And we have a very selfish culture. And so it's so much easier to outsource, like you said, the things that help make us great human beings. We can outsource generosity. We can outsource compassion, empathy. We can outsource taking care of people who are in close proximity to us. And so that has become a problem, that we are not growing great human beings. We are simply growing selfish, ambitious, and probably successful human beings. But you can be successful and not a good human at the exact same time. We see that all the time. And so, yeah, whenever you don't learn these responsibilities and these characteristics, character traits, you're not growing. And so, yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think it's a major issue that we face, but we have to be intentional about addressing these things. And you can only fix what is within your domain of fixing. And so we can talk about, we need to fix the government. Well, you really can't fix the government. What you can do is you can fix where you are, and you can address your family and your community. And if many of us will do that, we can then address the big elephant in the room, which is the federal government or state and local government. So it begins in our own house, begins in our own hearts, and not outsourcing our virtues to a very cold entity that has no real concern for each and every individual.
Exactly. As you were saying that, the thought that came to my mind is that there is, of course, people like you and me who talk about limited government. And the problem with talking about limited government in a vacuum is that if we are unwilling to fill the gap that has been taken by the government, if we are unwilling to turn people away from, the welfare office towards, the food pantry at the church, or towards sustainable structures that would not only just cut a check and not care about your eventual destination, if we are not willing to be in the gap, I think it is hypocritical for us to call for a smaller government, because the people who reject that call are saying, if the checks from the government stops, what am I doing tomorrow?
Yeah.
Right? And so the question is, are we ready to put our money where our mouth is? Are we ready to stand in the gap to make sure our neighbors are taken care of? Are we ready to be who we claim to be? And there is this trend in America where a lot of people don't know their neighbors. They don't know their neighbors. They don't, go and walk over and say hi as people move in and move out. And how are you going to care for someone whose name you don't know? How are you going to care for someone whose circumstances you don't understand? Right? How are you going to care for someone whose, trials are foreign to you? Right? And so we need to, of course, begin by building and strengthening our neighborhoods. I love the fact that you talked about focusing on your sphere of influence. There is this, I say, movement in America of people taking on challenges that are way outside their sphere of influence, right? People who want to stop climate change, or people who want to stop ice, and they travel all the way outside of their community to some foreign place, to some out of state location to go fight something, when there are challenges in their own neighborhoods, in their own backyards, that they have not tackled themselves. And so how can we prepare ourselves to actually be people of our word by transforming our understanding of our own role in being family, being community, before asking our neighbors to stop relying on the government?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think it's a whole lot easier to address the speck in somebody else's eye across the street than to deal with, the log that's in your own eye in your own household. And so, yes, you can identify, it's a problem in this city, this community, whatever it may be, but you got to, address your own stuff in your own house. And that's where it becomes a vital thing, because people aren't going to embrace you as an outsider coming into their community to tell them how to operate and do all these things when your own household is falling apart. Why would they want what you have? And so you have to address your stuff. You have to address your house. And so that's where it begins. That's where, and like I said, it's not that you can't help other people outside of your sphere of influence, but you have to begin within yours. And if you'll do that, then it can spread. And those are wonderful things. But, you got to focus. You have to focus on you, because you can impact and influence you. You have to focus on your immediate family, because you can impact and influence your immediate family, and then those who are within your community. And if we do that, I believe, one, we'll have a greater concern for our community, because we're focused on our community. And a lot of that just comes down to being intentional, getting out of the trap of these things right here. These are a trap. The selling point was, this is going to make your life easier, and your phone will be your servant. Well, I disagree. I think that I am the slave and the phone is the master. I don't think the phone is the servant and I the master. And so it's tough in the world that we live in. Some new variables have been thrown into the human experience, like social media. And so sometimes you have to get out of social media to live in the real reality of your life, your family, dealing with the issues. Because listen, I go to social media, I can see all the problems in the world that are happening, and kind of ignore the problems that are happening in my own backyard, right? Because I can see other people's problems. And so it is a healthy practice to identify, to, look in the mirror. What's happening in my family? What's happening in my heart? What's happening in my church? And begin with those issues first, because to your point, I cannot fix the problems that are happening over, say, in Minnesota right now. I don't have the ability to do that. I can't address those things, but I can address what's happening in my heart and within my family. And if I will do that, I can then have a greater impact because we've addressed those issues. So I think that's where it begins. You got to, look in the mirror first.
Yeah. So all that means something, but let's talk about the proper role of government, because there is a proper role, right? There is a proper role. So when we talk about, relying on family as a social safety net, we understand that not all families are created equal. There are people who are born in unfortunate circumstances. There are people who are victims of tragedies. There are people who are victims of crime, people who need support, who may not have the traditional sense of the family around them. So, is there a place for government intervention, especially if, for instance, in cases of abuse where family members are the cause of the suffering of others? So what would you say is the rightful place of the government, and where do we draw the line for, where government goes too far?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And, there's a biblical answer to the role of civil government. It's very clear what civil government is supposed to do, and then maybe what it's not supposed to do. The Bible describes the role of government as protecting good citizens, and then the main purpose of civil government is to wield the sword and to punish wrongdoers. The Apostle Paul talks about how if you do what is right, you have nothing to be afraid of. However, if you do what is wrong, you should be absolutely terrified of civil authorities, because they have been placed there by God to wield the sword of justice on behalf of God against wrongdoers. And so the role of government is really law and order, that it is to protect good citizens from people who are not good citizens. And good citizens should be held accountable for whatever their crimes may be. Now, here's the beautiful thing about the Bible. It's very clear that the punishment must fit the crime. In a lot of societies, the punishment exceeds the crime that you commit. You commit a minor infraction and you get treated like a murderer. Well, the Bible is very clear. That's that whole expression, tooth for tooth, eye for eye, fracture for fracture, life for life, meaning that if you break somebody's arm, you should receive a punishment equatable to breaking someone's arm, not murder. You shouldn't be put to death because, you committed a fracture. And so that's the proper role of government. But that does get down to protecting good citizens. And so let's say there is abuse that is happening. Well, the role of government would be to intervene in that moment, to protect the person that is being abused, but then also to punish the person that is committing that abuse. And so, a total intervention on that end. However, is it the role of the government to meet every need that we may have in this life? And the answer is no. That is not the role of government, because the government cannot meet every need that you have in this life. Is it okay to have a safety net? Sure, I'm okay with a safety net, but a safety net is not meant to be a lifelong lifestyle. You should not live your entire life on, say, a welfare system. It is a temporary assistance in a season of crisis, but it is not meant to be something that you're on for 40, 50, 60, maybe even 70 years of your life. And so that's what we have to correct. The welfare state, or the dependency upon government, it is a temporary assistance. That's what it should be, at least. It is not a lifestyle that you should be dependent upon, because, like I said, if you're dependent upon the government for the entirety of your life, the government that feeds you will always enslave you. And that is not God's purpose for your life whatsoever.
I love the fact that at the beginning of this conversation, you talked about um, godlessness, right? The fact that we're basically as a society trying to dethrone God, right? Because the way that I connect the two is this: the God that we worship, at least a Christian God, is a God that expects us to develop who we are, that expects us to take our talents and when he returns to see that talent multiplied, right? His goal is to prepare us for our full potential. And if that is the goal, then it requires us to do certain things. We're not just objects of need that need to be fulfilled, right? And so once you begin to remove God from the equation, what you're left with is a bunch of people who have no real purpose and who are not being prepared for something greater, which means the lessons they learn don't matter because this life is all that matters. And so if this life is all that matters, then all that we care about is give them what to eat, give them a place to sleep, and that's it. Basically, there's no harm in them hiding their talent in the ground for fear of losing it, right? But a God fearing generation, a God fearing country recognizes that our purpose is more than this life provides. And
Yes.
this life is a preparation towards something greater, which means that we're here to learn, to adapt, to become more like our Jesus, right? And so that when we see him, we will be like him, right? We will have the compassion, the long suffering, the faith, the perseverance, the patience. He wants us to develop those traits in ourselves. And so once you remove God, none of those things matter because once you remove God, there's no afterlife. And if there's no afterlife, then all that matters is your temporal existence on this earth. And once you're left with that, then nothing else matters. Family doesn't matter. The government, then it always becomes a competition between systems of government. And so some people might say, well, some families are going to indoctrinate their children in ways that we don't agree with as a state. Therefore, the state should intervene and usurp that role and ensure that whatever the approved curriculum is what is indoctrinated into our children. And so there is a connection between godlessness and rejecting God and supporting larger government. Now, some people may not be able to draw that line very clearly, but I can see it very clearly that when you reject God, you reject the systems that God has set up, then you have to create your own systems to replace them. And those systems can give you temporary satisfaction, but they never fulfill your divine purpose and your spiritual potential. Right? What do you think?
I totally agree with you. Any time that you remove something that is a big thing in life, society, a nation, then you have a void and a vacuum. And someone or something has to fill it. I mean, we see that all the time with what we call regime change in regards to nations abroad. So you have a regime change in a particular country, and then there's a vacuum, right? Someone or something has to fill it. And not always does someone better fill in the role or the regime change of a dictator. You get something sometimes far worse. And so when you remove God out of your life, out of your society, if you remove God out of your nation, well, now you have a vacuum. And something has to fill that void. And in our case, here in the West, in America, that something has been government. Government has filled the void of God because we have to have someone or something do that. And I will promise you, government is not good like God is always good. Government is not always truthful like God is always truthful. Government is not always compassionate like God is always compassionate. Government is not always loving like God is always loving. So we have substituted a good God with a very cold government. And that is why our systems and our society, it's not flourishing, because we have taken God and we have said we no longer want you as the central theme, as our provider, our protector, our guide. We want government to be our provider, government to be our protector, government to be our guide. And it hasn't worked. And historically, it has never worked. And futuristically, I am not a prophet, neither the son of a prophet, but it will never work. It'll never work. You cannot replace God with government and expect to flourish. It just will never, ever work. And that's what we're trying. And I'm just hoping that the absolute failure of this trial will wake many of us up to the realization, you know what? I think having God as my protector, my provider, and my guide produces a much better life than having a very cold and distant government provide for me, protect me, and guide me. And so that's the hope. That's the hope.
That's the hope. And so let's wrap up here by discussing the road back. So we are where we are today as a country, and it seems insurmountable to think that we could turn the tide. You know, one of the challenges we have today is that everything that seems to be happening to us seems like it's inevitable, right? It seems like, you know, it's a slippery slope that is oiled, well oiled, which makes it very difficult for us to stop the tide. And so for many of us, it feels like, you know, a thankless job. It feels like it's insurmountable. We're not going to overcome it. And eventually the world is going to decay even further. And even for us Christians, I mean, we hear about, you know, the end times and how the end times would look like, you know. And so that might make some of us feel apprehensive, or in some cases apathetic, because we feel like, you know, there's just nothing I can do. So let's talk about the road back. One of the things I said in the article on the road back is, you know, first we must restore honor to the roles that sustain family life. We must speak with reverence about fathers who provide, mothers who nurture, and children who obey. These are not outdated ideals, they are eternal principles. All through our media today, we still have that narrative of the buffoon dad who knows nothing, who, you know, is always getting things wrong, the Homer Simpson type dad, and who is always having to be redirected towards goodness by his spouse or someone else or something like that. And we have devalued fathers, right? We've devalued the honor of fatherhood. And that is something we must definitely return to. I said, secondly, we must rebuild interdependence within extended families. So I know in America, our nuclear family is really important. And that is something we stick to, we travel across the country with, we do everything with, and we support. But I feel like we need to begin to go beyond that. Because if all we say is, well, you know, I am the father, I'm the, you know, here's my wife, here are my children, and I'm going to, you know, completely ignore everything else, right? Then we're saying to maybe that cousin, that, you know, nephew, that niece, that grandparent, that person that needs a little support, we're saying, sorry, our support does not extend to you. And we leave those people to the government. And one of the tragedies, and I know in some cases it's unavoidable, but one of the tragedies is when you go to an old folks home and you find people. My daughter is a CNA and she worked in old folks homes, and one of the challenges she had is people abandoning their parents. You know, maybe they're paying the bill, but not showing up to be there for them. And it's quite tragic. So these are things that we must restore, not just talk about it, but restore. And then third, I said we must reform our thinking about charity Instead of waiting for Washington or the local city council to solve every hardship, we must rise to the challenge ourselves. Churches, civic groups, and neighborhood families should once again become the first responders. And then finally, we must model what we wish to see. The restoration of the family will not begin with policy, but with personal example. That means we have to be faithful fathers, faithful mothers. We have to love our families enough not to cheat and not to break up the family by being selfish with our actions, right? We have to do all these things in order to maintain, to not be hypocrites. One of the things that Jesus hated the most in the scriptures are hypocrites. You know, he hated people who would pretend to care, and when the time came, they were nowhere to be found. And so we have to actually live what we believe in order to begin to turn the tide. Any last thoughts?
Well, I would say what you just shared, I dare not add to because that was phenomenal. As much as I'd like to add to that, those are some really, really solid points. And just to highlight the concept of honor. I think that's a virtue that we have really lost within our society. I can't speak for, other countries around the world, but the honoring of the position of the father, the position of the mother, honoring the position of elected officials, honoring the position of pastors and spiritual leaders within our community. Honor is the currency of the kingdom of God. And there has to be honor within a society. And when you don't have honor and you treat everyone as common and ordinary, you begin to treat God that way as well. And so recognizing there is a separation between a father, a mother, and children. They're not equals within the family construct. There's the father, there's the mother, and then there are children. And children give honor to the father, to the mother. But it's the same way in our relationship with God. We are not co-equals with the Almighty. He's the Creator, and we are the creation. He's the King, and we are citizens. He's the potter. We're the clay. And when you recognize that differentiation between us and God, well, the only natural response is honor and reverence. And whenever you bring honor and reverence to God, well, that will begin to shape how you view the rest of the world, how you behave, how you respond. And so honor to our grandparents, giving honor to just, that's such an important, vital role. If we could restore honor within our culture, I bet you would see a significant shift. And so how do you do that? Well, you start with you. You show honor and you express honor. And it'll be contagious, I'm sure. They always say courage is contagious. I bet honor is contagious as well. And so it begins with us. And my brother, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about these things. I really enjoyed it, and you had some incredible points. Yet I may steal some of those in an upcoming sermon, Very, very good stuff.
Thank you so much for joining us today. The goal of the podcast is not to exacerbate the differences that we have as a country. That's why we call this Restitch America. We have so much more in common. And unfortunately, we live in a country where our differences are amplified and the things that we share in common are minimized. And so I love to have these conversations with people from all walks of life. And what I have found is that when we begin to talk about eternal principles, it is so easy to find people on our side of that conversation, right? When the focus is on the eternal, when the focus is on the things that are not, moved by every whim of, the electorate or every whim of some activist group, you realize that that is where true patriotism and true compassion and true virtue reveals its head. And I love to have these conversations. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of Restitch America. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider liking, following, subscribing, and sharing this with anybody. And remember, please go to willfulpositivity.com and subscribe to be part of the community. You're going to love it. And Jackson, thank you so much for joining us today. And we
Thank you.
hope to see you back here sometime soon. Before we go, please tell the audience where they can find you.
Yeah, they can go to my website, jacksonlahmeyer.com. Lahmeyer is Lahmeyer, jacksonlahmeyer.com. And then all my social media links and all the, all the platforms that we're on, it is there. So jacksonlahmeyer.com. My brother, I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you for coming, and we'll see you all next week.